Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and I'm joined by Jefferson Morley, a former reporter for the Washington Post, who runs a fantastic website called jfkfacts.org. And we're talking today about the great ebook that the Future of Freedom Foundation is about to publish that was written by Jeff Morley. When I first encountered Jeff, it was a result of an episode that he describes in this book. It was about a CIA agent named George Joannides, and I had read Jeff's account of a lawsuit that he had filed against the CIA arising out of Joannides' activities prior to the assassination and the CIA's deception and cover-up with respect to Joannides after the assassination. And I was so intrigued and so impressed by the perseverance and determination of this guy that I started writing a series of articles for FFF on the George Joannides matter. And that matter is explained in detail in this book. Now, this book is exciting. It's not your standard conspiracy book. We've published some of those. We're very proud of the books that we've published. They've become all great sellers on Amazon. Our all-time bestsellers, The Kennedy Autopsy, that I wrote. And we have one by Douglas Horne called JFK's War with the National Security Establishment, Why Kennedy Was Assassinated. And of course, Horne served on the ARRB back in the 90s. We've got another one called The CIA Terrorism and the Cold War, The Evil of the National Security State. And finally, Regime Change, the JFK Assassination. But this book is in a sort of a different genre. It raises really intriguing questions from a reporter standpoint, because that's what Jeff is, a reporter, of the CIA conduct with respect to the JFK assassination, a conduct that has been deceptive, that has been deceitful. And so Jeff reports on these, and a lot of this is investigative reporting that he's done in the book. And so when he approached us and said, would you all be interested in publishing this book? I read it and I said, absolutely. This book raises very disturbing questions about the CIA's conduct with respect to the JFK assassination. So Jeff, it's great to have you here, and thank you for doing this great book. We're excited about it. And why don't you tell our viewers what you think about this book, why you think it's important, why you want it published, and why you're excited about it.
Well, first of all, thank you for publishing it. I came to you when I saw the books that you had published on the assassination, and I realized that I had all this material that I'd been gathering over the years, and I'd never put it all in one book. It doesn't add up to a nice, tidy thesis like a commercial bookseller wants. But like you say, this is important stuff. This is a very close look at maybe a dozen CIA officers who played some role in the events leading to the assassination of the president. And they might have known something, they might have done something. But anyway, I was always very unhappy or dissatisfied with JFK books because I felt like there were leads sitting around and nobody was going and finding the people. And I knew that some of these people were still alive, or their kids were alive, or people who they worked with were alive. And so I just started going after them and trying to run down as many documents and people and put them together, not with an idea of knitting it all together into some great thesis, but just to delve deeply into all of them. And that's what this book is. It looks at CIA covert operations officers working in Miami, New Orleans, who know about Oswald before the assassination or are involved in assassination operations themselves. And so this book really takes you inside the CIA in that period. And then subsequently, you know, what was hidden back then, what's been slowly revealed, and how it came to light. And so the book is a little bit of a detective story that unfolds in time. And you see over time how the things that were concealed a little bit at the first, you scrape it away. Lo and behold, there's another story behind it. So this book has the most complete account I've ever published of the story of George Joannides, psychological warfare officer working in Miami in 1963 and running the young Cuban, the anti-Castro students who come in contact with Oswald. And Joannides' proteges in this student group are the ones who really publicize Oswald before the assassination more than anybody else. And that fact alone is worth just pausing on, because that was totally unknown. That the people who came out within hours of the president's death to say the accused assassin is pro-Castro, that was a CIA front group. And I say that without any fear of contradiction. The CIA has never said that any of my reporting on any of this is wrong. So this is very solid story, and readers can decide for themselves, how does it fit in with their understanding? But I guarantee you this, whatever you think about the assassination, you will come out of reading this book knowing more about what really happened.
Yeah, and it really is a detective story. I mean, when Joannides, his role is kept secret by the CIA, not just from the Warren Commission, but also from the House of Select Committee in the 1970s, and then from the ARRB in the 90s. And then what I found fascinating, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This story was buried very deeply, and we still don't have it all. My lawsuit tried to get at this, and the CIA reacted very defensively. Never sought to explain what was going on, only to shut me down. That was the only thing. And the fact is, the CIA does talk to reporters, and if you go to them and you say, could you explain to me what's going on and explain it off the record? I won't quote you. They will do that sometimes, but in this case, no. And so, they would say, well, Morley is a conspiracy theorist. I would say, well, tell me what you think and I'll print that. And they wouldn't do that. So I think that's very telling that this is something they really, really don't want to talk about. And that has to be cause for concern for anybody who's interested in the Kennedy assassination. I mean, if the official story is so obvious and true, as we've been told for so many times, then why not talk about it? Why not talk about its obviousness and its truthfulness?
Yeah,
they can't do that in this case. They can't do that in this case. There are aspects of the story. What did George Joannides know? Did he report these contacts between his agents in New Orleans and Miami to the CIA before the assassination? Did he report it after the assassination? He certainly should have. And that's what my lawsuit aimed was, what was he, what did he report? We don't know any of that. So what I tell in the book is what was going on. Who was this guy? And I talked to people who know him, the Cubans who he worked with. They were young men who had come out of the University of Havana in the early 60s, fired up about opposing communism and all that, and made an alliance with the CIA. Well, I went and found them, and they talked about the man. They didn't know his real name, but they described him accurately. He was from New York. He spoke with a New York accent, was very well dressed, had a nice big pinky ring, and all of that was true. That was the man named George Joannides. And all the documentation that I've got from the CIA, and also which I found at the University of Miami, corroborated the story a dozen different ways. So this guy was in the thick of the story, and yet he was not told to the Warren, his existence was not disclosed to the Warren Commission. He himself stonewalled the HSCA, and after he was dead, the CIA tried to stonewall the Assassination Records Review Board in the 90s. And I tell all that story in the book of how they didn't get away with it and what we do know about what he was doing. Was Joannides involved in a conspiracy? I don't have any evidence of that, but he was deeply involved in the events that led to the assassination, and his actions have never been explained. So this book really lays that out and then puts his story in the context of other CIA officers who were his colleagues and whose names are better known, like Bill Harvey, David Phillips. And so you can see how Joannides fits into the bigger picture of these characters who are also well known. Harvey, well known for running the CIA's assassination operation, ZR Rifle, and also known for his intense hostility to the Kennedy brothers and their Cuba policy. David Phillips, suspected by some on the HSCA of perjury, ran psychological warfare. He was Joannides' boss, basically. And so the Joannides story is put in the context of these other more well-known stories, so you get this bigger picture of CIA operations related to Oswald and the events that led to the assassination.
Yeah, and how many times do you have a federal judge accusing the CIA of deception and deceit? And that's exactly what Judge John Tynum, who had headed the ARB, accused the CIA of doing as a result of their deception relating to Joannides. And the other thing that you point out in this book is when the CIA was supposedly cooperating with the House Select Committee in the 1970s, when the two young investigators, Hardway and Lopez, started getting a little bit too close for comfort with the CIA and discovering documents and records, they called Joannides out of retirement to serve as a liaison. But as we now know, as you point out in the book, he was really an obstructor of justice there. His job was to block access to CIA records relating to the assassination.
Absolutely. And Bob Blakey, the head of the counsel for the House Select Committee investigation, told me this was obstruction of Congress. This was a felony. And Judge Thunheim, the head of the AARB in the 1990s, they didn't get the story. The AARB shut down and only got a handful of records related to Joannides. And Thunheim told me, if we'd had the time, if we had known about this, we would have gone back and gotten a lot more. We would have demanded to know really much more about this guy. We didn't really know who he was. And so they made these records public, but they had no ability to follow up. And so that's the situation that we find ourselves in now. And now we're looking at the October 2017 deadline for the declassification of all the JFK records that were supposed to be made public under the JFK Records Act. So, we've got a little time horizon where we may have some more disclosure around these CIA officers in the next, year and a half.
Well, I loved it when you said that the CIA was really the first promoter of a conspiracy theory in the Kennedy assassination, because when the DRE, which was being secretly funded through Joannides by the CIA, immediately after the assassination, with Joannides' full knowledge, they come out with this press release advertising Oswald's bona fides with the communist world, the Soviet Union, Cuba. In other words, implying that this was the Soviet Cuban assassination.
Absolutely.
That was the first conspiracy theory.
Within 48 hours of Kennedy's death, the Cuban Student Directorate newspaper had the headline, "The Presumed Assassins," over pictures of Oswald and Castro. And it was the first JFK conspiracy scenario ever to come into public print. And that publication was paid for totally by the CIA. And so, and even that fact was totally unknown. So this was a story that you can tell this was supposed to be a CIA operation that was supposed to be secret from conception to eternity. And now it's not. And you can see them in the course of the book. You can see that they're caught. They thought this whole thing was going to go and there would be no attribution to the CIA. And now it's there, and they can't deny it at all. And like I said before, CIA has never said that one word that I've written about this whole matter is inaccurate. And if I had made a mistake or said too much, they would have come down on me like a ton of bricks.
Absolutely.
So I take their silence as a kind of compliment that this is accurate reporting.
Yeah, and then another tidbit in your book that I just found so amusing was your with interaction with a CIA official named Jane Roman, where you hunted her down and you found her and arranged an interview with her. And when she said, "How did you find me?"
I had to give away some trade secrets there. Yeah, I found the records of her daughter's condo, actually, and found her phone number that way. So, that's one of the tricks of the trade. But yeah, and Jane Roman, a very well-placed, she was the liaison officer between the counterintelligence staff of the CIA and all government agencies, mostly the FBI. But when the counterintelligence staff communicated with another government agency, Jane Roman handled it. It was a position of considerable trust. And I went to her in the 90s when some declassified documents came out, and her name was on them. And so I looked up the names of all the people who were on there, because I thought whoever handled pre-assassination intelligence about Oswald had interesting information. I mean, to me, that was just a great, like a great lead, a great news story in the making. And so I found her, and then we went and talked to her. And as I tell the story in the book, very careful lady, very loyal to the CIA, very, very good memory of these events, recalled with precision things that had happened 30 years before. And she said some very interesting things. Basically, what it boiled down to, when you read the book, you'll see, they were very interested in Oswald 40 days before the assassination. And this simple fact, and this is not, there's no disputing it, this simple fact was totally unknown to the Warren Commission. I mean, imagine the public reaction if it had been known in 1963 or 64 that a half dozen CIA officials reviewed Oswald's record and thought about it and wrote cables about it and made decisions about him. And that all happened 6 weeks before Kennedy was killed. We didn't find that fact out for 30 plus years. And then you add on top of it the story of a guy like Joannides, which we didn't learn for 40 years, 50 years. And you realize there's something here that's been buried very deeply. So my book kind of opens up that door and leads you into this room and just says, take a look around. Look at what these people were doing and decide for yourself.
Well, and I loved it when after you had conducted this interview as an investigative reporter with Jane Roman, she telephones you the next day in a sheer panic that apparently she talked too much.
Yeah, and all we did was just say, here's the record. You could, tell us about this. What was happening? And that's just good reporting. You don't go in and accuse people of something, or have a theory and say, is my theory right? This is where a lot of people go wrong when writing about the JFK story. No, you present the facts to knowledgeable people and you say, well, what was happening? And that kind of restrained approach with Jane Roman really pays off. She says some things about the handling of intelligence about Oswald before the assassination that are absolutely fascinating and telling, very telling about the whole story. So that was really, that was kind of my first big story that I did in JFK when I was in the 90s. And I realized, man, this is a good story. This is not like somebody's making this up or pushing conspiracies or something. This story of what's going on with the CIA and the JFK story is really rich, and there's way more here than they ever told anybody.
Yeah, no, once you start reading this book, you can't put it down. Like, as you said in the beginning, this is like a detective novel, but real true to life. Okay, well,
Yeah.
let's wrap it up by talking about the records release that is scheduled for October or November of 2017.
So let me just explain that, because it's a little complicated. People say, well, I thought all the records came out, or I thought the records were staying secret till 2075. Well, here's the story. When Oliver Stone made his movie in 1992, created a huge fuss, and he got attacked left and right, playing with history and all of that. And he countered with, well, if the government doesn't have anything to hide, why are they hiding so much? And he pointed out the unpleasant fact that millions of pages of records related to the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee were still secret in 1992. So 29 years after the assassination, literally millions of pages. And so, Stone's movie put the Washington establishment in a bad light. It basically said, here was this plot against the president, and, it was falsified and covered up. And the Washington establishment, people were very embarrassed. And so Congress responded by actually doing something that was pretty sensible. They said, okay, we're not going to try and solve the assassination, but we are going to make all these records public. And that way we'll prove that the government doesn't have anything to hide. And so that was the JFK Records Act, which was passed in October 1992. It was the last piece of legislation signed by the first President Bush. It passed Congress unanimously. Imagine that in this day and age. A piece of legislation, significant piece of legislation about a serious event in American history, passed unanimously by a Democratic Congress, signed by a Republican president. and it mandated that these records be released. And so it created a process, and lots of records were released in the 1990s. But the law had a provision which said if the agencies want to withhold information for reasons of national security from their JFK documents, they can do that. But they have to give a reason, and after 25 years, all of that material, it can be delayed for up to 25 years, but after 25 years, it has to be made public. So that was 1992. 25 years later is October 2017. And so whatever the CIA didn't release in the 1990s or the years since then has to become public in October 2017. Now, and it's a lot of material. I'll tell you, Jacob, we know the National Archives says that it's about 3,600 documents from all government agencies. And these documents, a document can have hundreds of pages in it. So the 3,600 documents probably comprises 100,000 pages of material, or a significant, a shelf full of material. And so that is what's supposed to become public. A lot of that is relevant. The CIA says that this material is NBR, not believed relevant. That's the bureaucratic code for this material. But we know something about these records, and we know that at least some of them are highly relevant to the assassination story because they concern these officers who are implicated in the story, like Bill Harvey, the head of the assassination program, like David Phillips, in charge of psychological warfare operations. David Morales worked in the JM Wave. Howard Hunt, the Watergate burglar, who implicated himself in the crime of Dallas at one point. Records regarding those officers are included in this material that's supposed to come out in October 2017. So some of this material is going to be very relevant to the assassination. And that's what we're looking for now, is maybe they can fill out the picture that this book explains, and maybe we'll learn more of the story at that time.
Yeah, really, it's strange that they put the ARRB out of business, but the document production still has to take place. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd want that commission in existence to enforce the release of those documents. And people,
this is the real problem now, is that according to the law, the way the law was written was when the AARB went out of existence, the National Archives was supposed to take over the responsibility for seeing the enforcement of the law. The problem with that is that the National Archives is a federal agency that gets a budget of about $400 million a year. Now, when they have a conflict with the CIA, a government agency that has a budget of about $15 billion a year, there's no way they can win. Right? The CIA is going to win any power struggle with the National Archives. The Assassination Records Review Board, on the other hand, was an independent agency, had the ear of the president, and the CIA knew they couldn't play around with them. The CIA, it would be embarrassing for them. So we don't really have a good enforcement mechanism going into October 2017, which is why it's really important that we have public discussion, because the only thing that will force the CIA to be into any kind of transparency is a fear of public reaction. That's the only thing that will get them to act, possibly. I'm not saying it will, but it might. So part of the reason that I wanted to put this book out now was to inform people about what the real situation is heading into October 2017, what we know and what we don't know. And I think if people can see that, then they'll understand the imperative of full disclosure in October 2017.
Yeah, and lots of people don't realize how much information, really smoking gun type information, came out as a result of the ARRB, which was brought into existence because of Oliver Stone's movie. I detail this in the Kennedy Autopsy, my ebook, which was really a recapsuling of Doug Horne's 5-volume book called Inside the Assassination Records Review Board. But for example, there was a woman named Sandra Spencer who worked in the photography center of the Navy here in Washington. She worked closely with the White House. I mean, you couldn't find a more credible witness than Sandra Spencer. And when the ARRB took her testimony under oath, she was asked to look at the official photographic records of the autopsy. She looked at them and testified under oath, those are not the photographs I developed. The ones I developed look totally different. And this is the type of thing that came out. Now, you would think that if they want to hide stuff, they'd put the ones they want to hide to the very end, over the 25-year lapse. And those are the ones that assassination researchers are now really interested in looking at. Now, there's one caveat here that they still haven't out. That somebody slipped something into the law there in 1992 that said that they can ask the president for another extension, right, Jeff?
Yes. And this is going to be the first big, open government decision that the next president is going to face. 10 months into his or her presidency, the president is going to have to decide whether to allow the CIA to delay the release of this material longer. Now, the CIA hasn't said what their position is yet, whether they will request delay. But knowing the CIA, you have to assume that they will request the delay of material, if only because some of it may be very embarrassing to them. And so this is why it's important that people know about it, so that and talk about it during this presidential election, so that we have some accountability here. And will the next president allow the CIA to keep on hiding this stuff, or will the next president say, look, the law was very clear, this is history, it's time to come clean and make it all public without exception? That's really the only satisfactory resolution to this. If the CIA plays games and tries to hide this, they're just going to draw more suspicion upon themselves. It's incriminating. So it's very important that we get full disclosure in October 2017. We can begin to say, okay, now we've got a reasonably complete record of the assassination. What do we know? And until that time, I think we really can't say, we can't draw hard and fast conclusions about the assassination. Not with 20, 50,000 pages of material still out there. Who knows what's in there? And you have to assume this is the last stuff they're releasing. You have to assume that this is the stuff that they do not want the public to see.
Well, the notion that national security, however you define that term, can be threatened or jeopardized by the release of 50-year-old documents is absolutely ridiculous. I mean,
it's not only ridiculous, but to use a word that is often thrown at those of us who are interested in the assassination, it's an incredibly paranoid view that this piece of paper from 50 years ago is going to damage the safety of an American today. I mean, you really have to concoct a weird theory to think that that's true, a weird paranoid theory. And that's the basis of CIA disclosure policy, paranoid theories.
Yeah, well, but I think it could go much further here, that if they really do ask for an extension, I think the only realistic reason that anyone can really draw is that because there really is incriminating material that they don't want the American people to see. And as you point out, it's only public opinion that's going to stop this, just like what happened in '92. The only reason we got the ARRB and the release of all those records was of public opinion. There was so much outrage over this continued secrecy, and that's a real testament to what Oliver Stone accomplished, that they've got the release of those documents, and that's what we need today, and that's what you're doing on your website at jfkfacts.org. There's other groups now that are forming to say, release the documents in October 2017. And in a large part, that's what this book is about let's get rid of all the secrecy in the JFK assassination. And the name of the book is CIA and JFK, The Secret Assassination Files. We're excited about the book, Jeff, and I want to thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to publish it.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to, I really want to hear from readers. The internet is a great way of sharing information, and without spilling any secrets, I've learned more recently about the George Joannides story, and there is definitely more to come. So I look forward to hearing from people. Every little bit helps in putting together this mosaic, letting your voice be heard in October 2017. And we can change the government's reaction to this. The public does, on the question of the JFK assassination, public opinion has the upper hand. public opinion is so strong and the government knows that its credibility is so weak that they have to comply with it. If they feel it, they will comply because they know that the alternative is very incriminating. So that's what we need to summon in the next year is people being knowledgeable and speaking out. And I think my book is a contribution towards really educating people so that we can have strong public opinion at that time and create the full disclosure that is so long overdue.
Well said, Jeff. The name of the book, CIA and JFK, The Secret Assassination Files.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.